Всем привет! Welcome back! Today I have for you another Lightroom tutorial, and in this episode we will be breaking down a recent photo that I uploaded on my Instagram channel. At first glance it doesn't seem like it is a lot of work, however I will admit it took me roughly 3 to 4 hours and it made me sweat a little bit. I had to think outside the box a bit in order to reach the final result that I was really happy with and also resembling the reference photo that I was always looking at. So let's get right into it. So here we are in Lightroom, and what you see on the screen are two different photos. The one on the left is the reference photo, the one I found in Pinterest. I really liked it and I wanted to recreate this effect. Now before we jump into the breakdown of this edit, I want to mention a few words about how I made this photo. This photo is a simulation of a sunset that goes through a window or any blinds. Yes, you heard it right, it is a simulation, meaning that my windows were completely closed, all the blinds were down, it was pitch black in this room. And to simulate this, I actually used my PAVOTUBO light and I placed a piece of cardboard with a cutout right in front of it. In fact, I learned that the further away you place a cardboard with a shape from the light, given that everything around it is completely sealed and no light is coming out, you will have a sharper shape projected onto the wall. And in this specific case, this is exactly what I did, and I just positioned my eyes right where the light was shining and then made a couple of pictures using my phone that was connected to the camera. So now let's look at how I edited this photo. So the first step for me is always lens correction if I'm editing photos that are made on a DSLR. If you don't know what lens correction is, basically it fixes warping that results in your image because of the lens. And if you look at an anatomy of lens, it consists of a bunch of different lenses which have a spherical shape. And that shape is reflected on the image because your image kind of bends a little bit. So using a lens correction will fix it and basically make your lines straight. So in this case, as soon as I turn it on, you can see that my face becomes a little bit tighter and better shaped. And when I open this tab, as you can see, all you have to do actually is just to press Enable Profile Correction. And if you're using a DSLR, Lightroom will know which camera you used and which lens and will adjust accordingly. With this out of the way, the next step for me was to adjust the temperature. And temperature is basically how cold or warm your photo is. In our case, we can see that it is quite cold, and if we're looking for a sunset vibe, we definitely need to make the photo warmer. So I changed the temperature to 4000 and this gave me a nice orange look from which I can base my edit on. Next step is the tones. So when it comes to tone or contrast, I like to always use my curves first and then use the sliders. In this case, if I open up my tone curve tab and I switch it on, as you can see, not a lot happened in the image. Mainly, all I did was boost our midsection to make my face brighter while not really touching any highlights, hardly doing anything in the darks, except for right here in the corner I lifted the blacks a little bit up. And the reason for this is to give it a bit of a faded look, which resembles our reference photo. If you can see here, it is actually very faded. However, in my case, I don't really like super faded photos, so I just lifted up just a notch to the point at which I really liked it. So with the contrast done, next what I wanted to do is to bring out a little bit more texture in my hair. And this was a bit challenging. Now if you look at the reference photo, you can see what I'm talking about. So in the hair, you can see this little highlights, the little white streaks here and there. And these add a little bit more interest to the photo because first of all, it shows that this is hair. We can see the light bouncing up and it just gives a bit more interest. Now in my case, if I zoom in, you can see that there is a little bit of highlights, but you hardly see it. Adding some highlights to my hair would make it more interesting considering they are very curly. So how do we achieve that? When I went back to the tone curve and I started moving the shadows, you see it does hardly anything. The same goes with the highlights. They just don't really affect hair at all, except for the blacks. So what I did was I actually increased my blacks by 34 points. It brightened up just ever so slightly, but it was just not enough. And here is the first point of this whole tutorial which I wanted to really share with you, and that's texture. So in the presence there is a slider called texture, and what it does is it plays around in a clever way with the contrast to bring out a little bit more texture. And in this case I really cranked it up to 92%. And when I do this, you can see that now my hair has more of this pop or more of the wet look. However, looking at my skin, it looks absolutely horrible, way too much texture, and this is why you need to be very careful with these parameters, both texture, clarity, and dehaze, because all of them in very big amounts create really crazy effects. They can actually destroy your photo. However, in this case, I was actually fine with keeping it so high because I knew that after I finish my editing, I'm going to do retouching, meaning I'm gonna clean up my face and make it look really pretty and nice, like the Instagram filters. So I wasn't really worried as long as I can get my hair to look like I wanted to. Next, what I did was I increased my vibrance by 8 and I decreased my saturation by -13. The reason why I did this was mainly to tone down the orange in the whole image. It was just a little bit too much. But the reason why I used vibrance and saturation is because saturation affects the whole image, so I dialed it down, but the vibrance increases the saturation of the least saturated parts of your image. This so you kind of balance it out a little bit. Scrolling down to our HSL and split toning, I used both. Let's start with our HSL. I'll open it up, and once I turn on this tab, you will see that my image becomes very desaturated. And again, this is because I'm basing myself on the reference photo. So here it is right here. And you can see that it is very desaturated, but at the same time, his face is very soft. So this can be achieved either by having soft light shining at you, or you can also add softness through the HSL. And I'm going to show you how to do this right now. The main magic happens in the saturation and the luminance. Starting with the saturation, I'm reducing the saturation of reds and orange. And the next component of the faded look is the luminance. And if I reset the luminance of red and orange, you can see that my face was very bright, particularly in the eye area. And this is because this is where the main light was hitting me. For me personally, this was a little bit too harsh, and especially when we compare it to our reference photo, you can see how soft it is. It was definitely something we needed to change. And what we have now is an evenly lit face, just like the reference photo. Next, we move to the split toning. Now remember how I changed my temperature to a warmer tone to have a more sunset feel? Well, now with the desaturation of the reds and the oranges, we basically go back to having a kind of a purple hue. Now this is where the split toning was helpful because I was able to balance it back. Now, of course, I could have done this by just changing my tint, which you can do right below the temperature. But the problem is that if you're going to be playing around with the tint, it's going to be changing the whole image. And this is not what I wanted because I did not want to affect my eyes or the highlighted areas. So this is where split toning can be very useful. So in my case, what I did was, and if I turn on the tab, you can see I just added a little bit more yellow to the mix. And it is very easy to do. Just press on this square right here, choose the color you want, and then play with the saturation in order to adjust it to your desired result. In my case, it's only at 9 points, so this is just enough for me to add a bit more orange or yellow to the mix, and it corrects my skin tones. Because if I increase the saturation, you can see how yellow it is. So it's just enough, super subtle, but makes a big difference. And that is it when it comes to the color editing. This is how I did it. However, there is one more thing that is very important that changed everything and made this photo look the way it is, and that is filters. And that's actually one of the main reasons why I decided to make this video, is to show you the power of the filters. And this photo, believe it or not, was the one that made me realize just how powerful they are. Now remember how I said that I wanted to boost the texture of my hair and to add more highlights? Well, the problem is that because of that, I couldn't actually use my tone curve or the tone sliders in order to darken my image. If you look at the reference photo, you can see that everything below his nose is just pitch black. You can see the silhouette of his shoulder, and then that's it. You don't see anything else. Whereas if you look at my photo, you can see a clear difference between my black t-shirt and the wall. You can also see my neck. There is also a light streak that comes from the other side of myself. And also you can see that just the line where the shadow starts, it's much softer than what we have in the reference photo. And this is something that I could not do using the tone curves. So this is where the effects was really handy. On the top here we have different types of filters, and the one I used was the brush tool. This one gave me more flexibility to do whatever I want. And once I switch it on, get ready, it is a big big difference. So how did I achieve this? So first of all, you can see I have 6 different points, each one doing something different. So first of all, let's press on the first one, and I'm gonna show this selected mask here to show you what I did. And as you can see, there's a very big area all in red. This is where the effect is taking place. Basically what I did was I started coloring in everything in this photo except for my face and also the light streak, because I wanted to darken it to the point where you don't see anything. And that's why the exposure level is at -4. So with that, when I take off this overlay, you can see that there is no separation between my t-shirt and the background. And the most important thing what I did, and let me zoom in, as you can see here, I drew manually the line, a harsher line of the shadow, exactly like in our reference photo. And it just gives that mask effect, which is amazing. Next, we're gonna jump into this top point right here. I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna actually move the preview screen a bit higher. If I turn on this mask overlay, you will see that there's just a bunch of different scribblings, and these scribblings are basically boosting the highlights of my hair. So if I take my exposure and I reset it to 0, you will see the difference. It's much darker, and when you go back, it just pops a bit more. Now remember how I told you that I'm going to correct the horrible skin I have, right? Well, this is exactly what I did. The first step was in Lightroom using the brush. I painted over all the major section of my skin, and all I did was take this texture and drop it down to -59, smoothing it out. Then what I did was focus on the eyes, and this is the main part of this whole image. Whenever you're editing anything, you need to always understand or determine what is the main focus point of your image, where you're going to be drawing all the attention of the people. And in my case, it's my face, but primarily my eyes. So the first step is this point right here. And when I select the overlay, you can see that I colored in the whole eyes. And all I did here was to reduce the temperature to a colder tone. And the reason for this is because a colder tone gave it a more whiter look. And I gave it a subtle, really subtle increase in brightness. The exposure, as you can see, is at 0.10. And next what I did was I created another filter, and this one covers the iris of my eyes. And here basically I increased the temperature by a little bit, giving it more of that warm feel, and also increased my saturation just to give it a nice pop. And the final thing for this edit was the eyeliner. I know this sounds really weird. However, what I realized is that when you have an eyeliner around the eye, it draws in more attention and it makes your eyes pop even more. And to demonstrate to you this, if I take the exposure and I just reset it to what it was, as you can see, it's pretty nice. It's really good. However, if I go back to how it was, you can see that it becomes darker. It kind of sucks you into looking at the eyes. Now I definitely look like an Indian or Persian assassin. Super cool. As if I come from the Assassin's Creed. And this is it when it comes to color grading this image. I hope you found it useful, learned something. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I see you next one. Пока.